Another off-season week is at the midway point. So too is the State of the Position series after today, Wednesday, on the Podcast Daily. It is time for Bill Landis and me, Austin Ward, to talk tight ends. It's the one everyone has been waiting for, Bill.
I feel like this is an Austin episode. This is me just kind of letting you cook. You love the tight ends.
I do love the tight ends, and there's like way more current and future intrigue with this position than like there's any business existing for Ohio State. And
Yeah.
I don't mean that from like it's not a negative necessarily, because Ohio State recruits very well. When they had to go in the transfer portal, I think they got a nice pickup in Will Kazmarek, not one that I think was on a lot of radars. They have, a very touted veteran, former touted recruit, and a veteran in G. Scott to lead that group. It's like they're all the pieces kind of exist out there, but how they fit together in 2024 and what the room looks like in 2025 are like, there's a lot of uncertainty there.
If I say this is the position group that I'm most uncertain about, is that a hot take? More people say offensive line, or where do you think that would land?
I don't disagree with it. I think people have a lot more, well, maybe from the perspective of there's more quote unquote concern about what's going on at right guard. And I don't know that the tight end spot lands on like a position of worry radar for many people, but you know how I feel about it. And that's that this team and Ryan Day wants to run with 12 personnel. Chip Kelly wants to run the football. Tight ends are going to have to block for both of those things to happen.
Yeah, and that's really what it's all about for me. I almost don't care what the receiving production is from this position group this year. Obviously, it'll matter, like in the red zone, especially. I'm not trying to be flippant about it, but how this group blocks, I think, will go a long way ultimately in determining how close this offense gets to reaching its ceiling. And I don't think the blocking at this position has been good enough the last few years. A part of that is due to injury. Part of that is due to, I think, probably some lack of playable depth in the room. But whatever the reason is, I just think it needs to be better. And I think there is reason to be optimistic that it will be. If you look at some of the numbers on Will Kazmarek, if you think that like maybe Bennett Christian might be able to help a little bit this year after missing last year due to suspension, but I don't know that I feel tremendous about it. So like, how do you feel, I guess, about this group's ability to kind of answer that bell in particular and block the way this offense needs them to block?
I think we're going to know a lot more by the middle of August, and then maybe beyond that into September. Will Kazmarek, I think we saw from the first half of spring camp, it was like, well, he's got the physical tools to go out there and block. He's not afraid to work. He's not afraid to stick his helmet in there and get dirty. Like, I think he can handle that. I think maybe the reason that it felt like Will Kazmarek's first spring, for the most part, was underwhelming was because it felt like he may be able to do all the things that Cade Stover can do. And as a passing threat, that may not be true. I guess we'll have to wait and see. I don't think there's going to be concern about him as a blocker. I think if you just ask Bennett Christian to go run over people as a blocker, he could do that. The conversation always winds up circling around to what G. Scott gives. If he is the primary tight end for Ohio State, I don't think there's much doubt about could he create problems for a linebacker or a safety trying to cover him. Yeah, I think he could. The confidence level, the way he's carrying himself, I don't think he's ever lacked any self-belief in his athleticism, and he willingly made the move down to tight end and knew that was going to be a long-term process. But you still, I think if you look at him and we saw him working at those camps, you're like, is that the guy to go like bulldoze down in 12 personnel and pick up a defensive end and seal the edge? Like, I still, like, I don't know. I'm still uncertain about that part of it. And it's not for a lack of effort, not for lack of willingness. It's none of those things. It's just like the frame, I don't think ever filled out to a Ruckert or Farrell or Hireman size. And that's fine. Not everyone is going to get to that point. They don't always have the ability to do that. I think G. Scott has done everything possible in the weight room to get to that point. But, I don't know, Bill. Like, I think they had some momentum carried in through the end of spring camp. And I think you look at the way that those guys have worked physically in the weight room in the summer. It's got to be encouraging for Keenan Bailey, but are they to the point where you know that you have a Hireman, a Vanette, a Rucker, when he was at his best, to pair there with, a Farrell? Like, I don't know if they've got that. I really don't,
Yeah.
but can they piece it together? Maybe.
So they have G. Scott listed as 6'3", 243 on the roster right now. I'd imagine during the season he'll probably play closer to like the high 230s if I had to guess. So like, and that to me is just not the kind of frame you want for like a every down sort of inline blocking tight end, which we've talked about before, and you just mentioned again there. But like, I guess I say that to make this point because we've talked about the way that Chip Kelly at UCLA especially like weaponized his receivers as blockers, and I'm not even talking on the perimeter. Like he would use them to like block the backside on like zone runs and stuff. Like I think G. Scott can do that kind of stuff for this offense, like movement block kind of things, if that makes sense. And then I think you might have a more of a reliable inline blocker in Will Kazmarek. And I was actually unaware of this. I should have looked it up, I guess, when they got him, and maybe you did and wrote about it. So I apologize if you mentioned it before. But last year, sorry, I'm battling a cold. Last year, Cade Stover was 101 in the country in run block metric by PFF, like among power conference or FBS tight ends. G. Scott was 163, and Will Kazmarek was 16th. Like he was significantly better at run blocking. Now it was against MAC defenders, and that needs to translate obviously to the Big Ten, where guys are bigger, faster, stronger. But even if it doesn't translate 100%, if it translates, even I don't know if half that translates, I guess I think they will have a better, more reliable sort of number one blocking tight end in this offense than they've had in a couple of years. And then you can get a little creative with G. You can obviously get very creative with Jelani Thurman, who probably deserves a few minutes of discussion here. So like, I don't dislike the room. I think like there are actually like some versatile, interesting pieces, but as I'm like laser focused on this group needs to block better, I am left wondering a little bit just like what exactly the ceiling is for the collection of them.
Yeah, I think it goes without saying that consistently blocking against MAC defenders is going to be different than going through a full Big Ten slate. So, I think it was helpful that Will Kazmarek spent 15 practices in March and April growing against one of the best defenses in the country. Like he's not going to have to block those people on every single snap that he goes through this year. So, and I think that you saw him spending a lot more time after practice trying to acclimate. He had said in January or February or whatever it was the first time we talked to him, it's like, I always thought that I belonged here. I'm not intimidated by it. And that's the mentality that you have to have. But it is also another thing to then now consistently be asked to do that day in and day out against, for a national title contender, against high level opponents every single week. And anybody I think is going to have some level of transition period before they get to that. I think the uncertainty is, on my end, is he up to speed in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 games? Are you ready for Iowa? Like maybe that's the test that you circle, and we're going to be paying, I think, close attention to that. And we'll see how Ohio State uses the tight ends for how much confidence they have, not just in Will Kazmarek to handle that, but G. Scott Jr., how much they use Patrick Gerd, which we cannot let this happen again, that I go 20 minutes without talking to somebody who was on the field for the first snap of the spring game and like was one of the first guys tabbed off the bench when Cade Stover was dealing with injuries in November last year. So, the tricky part, I think, in all of this conversation about those guys and the tight end position as a whole is like, how are we going to measure the success, or what are you looking for? I don't think that this is going to be a group that has 60 receptions. Like I don't. If you wanted to do that, there's a chance that you could, by how much you want to feature G. Scott Jr. Will Kazmarek was, I think, 21 to 23 receptions for Ohio last year. They didn't throw it to him a ton, but enough to know that you could if you wanted to. But like that makes it more difficult to assess it. And I think that's why we spent so much time talking about the run blocking bill. Is like that's got to be the bread and butter, because Ohio State really doesn't need the tight ends to be major factors in the passing game.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I guess this is an obvious statement, but like it is a position that is influenced heavily by whatever sort of the rest of the strength of the offense are. And this is a team that is, I think, going to want to run the ball significantly. So that's what this group needs to do this year. I don't think I would maybe say like 35 catches maybe for the group this year, and maybe it'll be a little higher than that. The one X factor in that is Jelani Thurman. I think if there's anybody who can push that number closer toward like a 50 receptions. It would be Jelani emerging as a guy who, like Chip Kelly and Ryan Day, think to themselves, like, we just got to find a way to get this guy a couple of touches a game per game in the passing game, because he's a real difference maker and he's a matchup problem. So I don't know. I thought he might break through for that, naively so, as a true freshman. So I'm like trying to be more cautious with what I think Jelani might be this year, but it remains on the table for me for him to emerge as maybe not tight end one because of how important the blocking is. I want to see him have more opportunities to block. He did grade out well, but it was on a very small sample size last year. So I want to see more of that before I believe that that's sort of, who he is. But I think he could emerge as the guy who maybe has the most receptions among this group.
Well, if you're making that like current season and future projection Venn diagram, I mean, Jelani Thurman is right there in the middle of it. So this is a big, he's in the midst of a huge offseason for him. You don't have to necessarily heap too much pressure on him to be tight end one, as you said, Bill, right away. But that opportunity and potentially the need for him to be that is not far away when you zoom out a little bit. And Ohio State's, got a couple commitments in this class. I think they feel pretty good about the partnership there with Nate Roberts and Brody Lennon. They've got Max LeBlanc in there, but and already working this summer. But when you're looking at this roster and what's coming forward at tight end with G. Scott and Will Kazmarek going to be gone, Patrick Gerd gone, there is a looming situation and looming urgency that like makes me think that there could be a possibility that they have to go in the transfer portal again. And it's a little bit like puzzling how they got to this point, but Jelani Thurman can erase all of that in some ways with the way he develops in year two.
Yeah, no doubt. I believe Will Kazmarek has 2 years of eligibility.
Oh, does he? Okay, I stand corrected.
Yeah. Well, according to Ohio State's website, anyway, he has 2 years of eligibility remaining. So like that's a stabilizing force, I think. At least you hope it is, right? But either way, like the room does get reshaped a little bit going into next year, and not so much because of like a slew of departures, because I guess in reality, maybe the only guy you do end up losing is G. Scott. But I think you're going to be calling upon perhaps like a second year Max LeBlanc maybe to help you, right? Like I think you want probably 3 or 4 guys who you find reliable, and if you say it's 3 going into 2025, well then it's Will Kazmarek, Jelani Thurman, and I guess Bennett Christian. Like I don't know. So there's enough uncertainty there for me to wonder exactly where it's headed. But I'm not on alert like at all for, I don't know. I guess I shouldn't say this because college football is crazy and guys do weird stuff. But like I guess Will Kazmarek could play well enough this year that he decides he wants to go to the NFL. Right? He's an older guy. I wouldn't be shocked by that, I suppose. But I am sitting here thinking that he is back in 25, that Jelani is back in 25, and that's a nice place to start. But you might feel an urge to go into the transfer portal, maybe again to find a guy there to kind of bridge the gap to Max LeBlanc, to Nate Roberts, and to Brody Lennon. Like I really like what Keenan Bailey is doing in recruiting. I think it's obvious we're seeing an uptick in the returns there, with him kind of leading that charge. Obviously, it's a multifaceted job. We have to see how he continues to build that room on the field. But I like the talent that he's bringing in. But there's a bit of a transition probably that's going to have to happen as he stocks that room with all of his guys over the next couple of years that might force them to look at perhaps another addition this offseason.
Someday I'll catch up on where everyone's actual eligibility.
It's impossible. Stands. Yeah.
I just, my head is always spinning, but I mean, that does change things a lot in terms of the future outlook. If you do have Will Kazmarek for another year, he spent, several years developing in Ohio. And I remember the stories about Ohio State turning on the film and, hey, before you make a judgment, you guys talk about Will Kazmarek and taking somebody from Ohio, watch the film, and they were blown away. It's like they have really high expectations for him. And if they get to reap the benefits of that for 2 years, that would be significant, because that also bridges some of the time here to help Jelani Thurman come along, which just watching him physically develop is one of the most fascinating things on Ohio State's roster, because I still feel like every time I see him, he's getting another inch taller and 15 pounds stronger.
Yeah. So like, what do you think this year's going to look like for him? Because I honestly, I don't know. Like I can let my imagination run wild for sure and think that he might have 35 catches this year, but I'm going to try not to do that. But like, what are you expecting for Jelani as a sophomore?
I did let myself, I think, get a little bit carried away with just what the raw physical tools a year ago, like that he's going to be a factor right away, and you have to use him in the red zone. And I always caution against that. Sometimes I ignore my own advice. I did that with Jelani last year. So I think I'm in a similar situation as to you right now. It's like, let's just let this play out a little bit. Some of it was, I think, Jelani needed to develop a little bit more as a receiving threat last year. I would have thought the opposite was going to be true. He had everything to get better at in year one, and that's not uncommon for true freshmen at tight end. But I thought that maybe he would be a little bit more refined as a receiver than maybe he actually was in year one. It's no problem. Not something that is a concern. Just wasn't where he was a year ago. So I'm not sitting here expecting like a massive explosion in terms of 20 to 30 catches or 5 or 6 tight ends. Like I'm not sure that that's going to happen. He has consistently, and I think admirably, continued to talk about blocking first. So I kind of sit here thinking right now that he would be third in reps, which I think may sound like a hot take to some people, just given his recruiting profile, what we view as the upside for him in the long term. But I think that's sort of where Ohio State is going to be in terms of patching things together with what G. Scott gives that he's very good at and can specialize at, what Will Kazmarek will do. I think he's going to, I still believe that he will finish with more snaps overall than anybody else in the tight end group, picking and choosing what you want with Patrick Gerd and Bennett Christian. Like, I think Jelani can do a little bit of what all of those guys can do, but that may not lend itself to him becoming the most used tight end.
Yeah, I would probably agree with you and say third right now, and partly because it just seems like unless excuse me, a younger player is just an extraordinary talent who's definitely and obviously ready to go, I think Ohio State is going to fall back on experience with this particular team, and obviously Will Kazmarek and G. Scott have more of that than Jelani Thurman does, but Jelani Thurman also has the traits to be extraordinary and special. So like if he tears it up in camp, then he can obviously be more than this team's number 3 tight end. And like he's 6'6", probably almost 260. Like he should be able to move people. Like I would be, you would think he'd be able to move people. And I think you're right in your assessment of his receiving ability. I think maybe it turns out that in high school, he just like kind of lined up outside and ran straight and jumped high and caught the ball over everybody, which is like, hey man, if it's a winning formula, don't try to do anything crazy. But there probably is some refinement that has to happen there. But I also think that Ohio State's pretty good at that. Like I felt Ohio State made Kate Stover like an excellent receiving tight end. So with Keenan Bailey's expertise, or kind of blend of expertise, I guess I should say, including some receiver coaching experience, like I think they'll bring that out of Jelani. I just don't know if it's going to like hit this year. Like I don't think we're going to see like the fully realized version of Jelani Thurman this year, but I think we'll see a better version of him, and I think that version can help Ohio State. I don't know quite yet how he fits into the pecking order, but I think maybe at worst he's like the third tight end, and with the ability to be maybe more of a tight end 2, or I won't rule out tight end 1, even if I think that's probably Will Kazmarek's job.
Yeah, I mean, Kate Stover was effusive in his praise, not just for Keenan Bailey, but in terms of coming along as a more complete receiver. Sean Banks, like you'd see them after almost every practice last year, and we've seen that as well with Sean and Jelani Thurman. Like the work ethic part, is not up for debate. He's going to do everything he can to get there. I like the dynamic of that room a lot. We've watched Keenan Bailey's development as a coach for the last 7-8 years. I think you can see some of that in his number 2 there. It's a good unit, and they've got a lot to prove. I like that part. I like watching the tight ends in general, but like some of that, they were wearing foxhole mentality stuff, on their shirts in March and April. Like this isn't a group that's star-studded, that has a ton of accomplishments already under their belts. G. Scott had a big recruiting profile. Jelani Thurman had a pretty impressive one as well, but like they haven't really accomplished anything. And so this is the one spot, maybe more than any, like there's going to be more importance placed on right guard. We would love to see what's going to happen. We'll get to linebacker, next week in the State of the Position series as that rolls along. But like in terms of an Ohio State development position, to take something that like it's not guaranteed to be a success. They weren't They weren't coming in as the number one unit in the country, like something with a group to prove something. You don't see that a lot on this roster. I'm just kind of intrigued by how that's going to play out.
No, and I think it's an interesting dynamic because I think it's a similar. Maybe I shouldn't make this comparison, but I will. I think it's a similar dynamic to what we saw from like Ohio State's corners, maybe like a year or two ago, right? Like just a lot to prove, a lot to back up. There's a lineage there that they weren't quite living up to, and it's not quite the same at the tight end position. I understand that, but I do think that's a pretty good motivating factor when you believe that there's a perception that your group might be like the one that holds you back, holds the offense back, holds the team back. And maybe there's more of that perception about the offensive line than there is the tight end group. But I think there's enough of it about the tight end group and enough uncertainty there and enough sort of inexperience, at least at Ohio State, that should fuel the group to become the best version of themselves this year, whatever that might be. So it's going to be exciting to watch for sure.
Yep. Can't wait. Just a few weeks away now from the start of training camp and getting back to real ball and not just speculating about it. But hey, it's July. We're 2 weeks away from Big Ten Media Days. We're going to be there soon enough. And we're going to be flipping the script now onto the defense as we start the state of the position group on that side of the football. Maybe we'll have a little Freaky Friday mailbag to break up some of this if you don't want us to just keep rolling straight through the position groups, which I can understand. I don't think that's what we want to do either. But we're almost there, folks. Thanks for bearing with us. It is a Wednesday edition of the Podcast Daily. He is Bill Landis. I'm Austin Ward. We'll talk to you later.